Hello, check. The audio is fine, I guess. Can you guys hear me? Hello, check. Okay, fine. So we'll wait for some more people and we'll start soon. Okay, guys, so welcome to this session on sound for films, and this is our second session. So, yeah, can you please increase the mic volume a bit more? Yeah, sure. Is it fine right now? Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Is it okay? Or should I increase it more? Okay, sure. Okay, so we'll start with the session. So as you can see, sound for films, and this is our second session, and I welcome you all to this session. Okay, so I'll just recall what we discussed yesterday. So as you all know, we started with the different layers which we hear while watching a film. So starting with, we have the ambience followed by the sound effects, and then we have Foley, and then followed by the music and background score, and we have the dialogues. So we have basically 5 elements which we hear while watching films. So after that, we discussed about the people working in film, the sound department especially. So we talked about on-location sound recorders, we talked about sound editors, we talked about Foley artists and Foley editors. Then we talked about sound designer, pre-mix engineers, final mix engineer or re-recording mixer. So we talked about all of them, and then we discussed about, as I told, we had few questions and all. So I think all of you are I cleared almost everything yesterday. So today, as you can see, we are on a second session, and today we'll be talking about creating an overview on session creation. So we'll be talking on what are the things which you should note or keep in mind while creating a session. So I'll be talking about it, and then we'll talk about the types of tracks and basic routing, and I'll be working on Avid Pro Tools, so it will be more on how you can work easily on Pro Tools. and basically the routing is common to all DAW. And then we'll be talking about basic surround sound tools. So we'll be talking about the panner, and then we'll be talking about the editing tools, followed by how to edit a clip and keep it in sync. And then we have preparing a session for mix, and we'll be discussing about sound session and background score session. So basically both of them are different, and we'll be talking about both of them on how to prepare a session. So moving forward, an overview on session creation. So as you can see, I have chosen two DAW. One is Avid Pro Tools, which you can see on your left screen, and then you have Studio One from Presonus on your right screen. So whenever you try to create a session, the first thing which they'll ask you is about the sample rate and your resolution or bit depth. So talking about sample rate, I won't be going more technical. I'll just give you a brief introduction so that if you're working on a project, you can select a sample rate, whichever is needed. So if you're working for films and such video contents, the sample rate which you choose is 48 kilohertz. So that's the standard for film production works. So whenever you're doing a film sound design or background score session, always choose 48 kilohertz. So that's the standard sample rate setting. And bit depth, we always choose 24 bit. And talking about sample rate, you will have many other options. You have 44.1, you have 48, you have 96, you have 192 kilohertz. So you have different sample rates. Often 44.1, many people by mistake chose 44.1. So one issue which comes up while you choose 44.1 is most of the film production works, as I told, happens in 48 kilohertz. So if you do a session in 44.1 kilohertz, what happens is you take all your tracks and import it into your 48 kilohertz session, and the first thing that will happen is your pitch and your tempo is going to change. If you did your track in a particular pitch, say C major or C, and your tempo may be 120, and if you bring this session into a 48 kilohertz session from 44.1 to 48, the first thing that is going to happen is your pitch and your tempo is going to change. So you'll receive a notification from Pro Tools or whichever DAW you're using. They'll notify you that you're going to import a session. You're going to import audio track which is having a different sample rate, and doing so, your pitch and your tempo is going to change. So always make sure that you choose 48 kilohertz for film production works. Let it be background score, dialogue editing, sound editing, anything. Always choose 48 kilohertz. And bit depth. I don't think there's always maintain 24 bit, and that's the best value which you can keep. And one more thing which you'll have to keep in mind while you create a session is FPS. So many people don't understand or don't give importance to FPS. So FPS is frames per second. So it's related to camera or video, and you may think why it's important for sound people. So as you can see here, we have two windows. So one is on the left and the other on the right, and I have drawn an arrow mark showing when you have in your session setup the blue circle, you can see it's 25 over there, and when you go down you have 25 written in white. So whenever you're working in Pro Tools, make sure that your FPS value is same. And if you look into your right screen, you have timecode rate as 30, and your and in your video track it's shown 25 FPS, and here it's shown in red. So which means your FPS is not properly matched. And in such cases, the main issue that happens when you do FPS is the first one, it's going to be out of sync. You may, in your session, everything may seem to be in time or in proper sync, but when you export or bounce your audio and hand it over to the editorial team, the first thing which is going to happen is maybe for the first few frames and all, the audio may be in sync, but after a particular time the audio is going to jump or is going to be out of sync. And this is a main issue which beginners face while working. Once they complete their session, they hand it over to the editor, and the editor complains that the audio is not in sync. And when you come back into your session, you may see everything. Your session may be showing it as properly synced, but even if you try to try to export your video from your session, then also you can see how it's going to be out of sync. So whenever you're trying to create a session, there are three main things which you have to keep in mind: sample rate, bit depth, and you have FPS. So FPS, as I mentioned, it's very important, even though it's only for the video guys. So when you're working in sound, FPS matters a lot. And in this session, the video which I received was 25 FPS, but when you're working, this was a cover song, and when you're working in film, the FPS for film is 24. So always make sure that when you're working in a film production or film work, make sure your session setup is matched to your video or your final your cut which you have received. So that was an important thing which many beginners forget. So moving on, we have types of tracks. So whenever you're trying to create a session, you know about audio tracks. Okay, what happens if bit length is changed and when is it to be adjusted? Actually, bit depth, it's not bit length, it's bit depth. So bit depth, it's generally kept in 24. So if you're talking about, I'll just give a brief introduction about bit depth. So bit depth determines your dynamic range. So talking about dynamic range, so I hope, okay, I'll talk to you about dynamic range. It's the range between the softest and the loudest part of your audio. You may have a very soft portion in your song and you will have a very loud portion. So that range is known as your dynamic range. And when you reduce your bit depth, what happens is you lose headroom, or you don't have more space to increase your levels. And what happens is you start distorting or clipping, or you may reach peak. So this is a main issue when you that happens when you reduce bit depth. So 24 bit depth, it has enough. So if you're talking, I'll just give a brief introduction about bit depth also. So bit depth, each bit value, so 1 bit is equal to 6 decibel or 6 dB. So a 16-bit audio, you can have 16 into 6, and a 24-bit audio you will have 24 into 6. So 24 into 6, you'll have a 144 dB of dynamic range. And human hearing, anything above 120 or 130, it's gonna damage your ear. So you don't need a dynamic range of 144 dB. So that's kind of a safer space or safer place for you. And keeping a 16-bit dynamic range, you get 16-bit depth, you get a dynamic range of 96 dB. So 96 dB, there are chances for your loud explosions and all to get clipped. So in such cases, the best value is 24-bit. So I hope I cleared your doubt. So moving on, we have types of tracks. So while working as a sound editor or in film production, you don't work this similar to the way you work while doing music. So in music, what happens is, if you have a particular track with guitar, you may add a guitar clip, or you may play a small melody, and then you'll have in your next track, you may have another guitar, maybe of a different tone, and then on your third track you may have maybe an electric guitar, on your fourth track you may have distortion guitar. So you may have 4 guitars, and you place it in 4 different tracks. So what happen in film production, it's not like that, how things work. So as you can see, I have ambience, sound effects, and foley. Ambience is in pink or purple color, sound effects in red, foley in yellow. So what we do while in film production or while doing sound editing or designing for films is, in this case, this is one of my template. So I'll just show you my session. So I hope you guys can see my session. So this is a session of a short film called Hoori, which you can see on YouTube. So this is my ambience tracks, as everything in purple is my ambience, and followed by I have my effects in red, and then I have my foley and footstep. So I have all of them here. So I'll just show you a small clip. So if you can see, I have layered it in such a way. I have these much number of tracks. So from this point up to here, I have one set. I have created a set, and in my second one I have similar to that. And upon here, I have my scene change around here. So while working on scene change, what I did was I took my B setting. So what you do is, as you can see here, at this particular frame, the scene is changing, and I have added some more frame extra from the first track. So that's fade out, and I have fade in for the second scene. So this particular audio, these two and this one, is working for the second scene. So here I have everything for my first scene, and I have these tracks for the second. So just keep in your mind, whenever you're doing sound edit for your visual, do not give cut like maybe you have this is a place where you can have your scene change. Never place your audio exactly at that position. Try to extend it and have a kind of fade in. So I have a fade in, and I have processed it, and that's why you cannot see it. You have fade in here also, so it's similar to this. Try to create a fade in so that you don't have jumps in your session. And so that's how, and I'll show you effects. So here, as you can see, I'll just play you this clip. I'm sorry, that was muted. So as you can see here, you have, I'll just show you. I have different sounds in the same track. So as you can see, the bike here, this particular bike, I have 1, 2 and 3 clips. So when you play together, and there's a second bike coming in, and for that I have used the same track, that is the same track where I place the bike audio. On the same track I have the sound for my second bike also. So and here I have my sound sound clip for the stand here also. And when I move towards here, So if you can see, this person is lighting a lighter. So I'll just solo it. So this clip is on the same track where I had my bullet and the stand, I mean not bullet, the stand. So that's how you do film production. You have a set of, I have just these number of tracks, and with these number of tracks I could complete the whole effects for this film. And moving on to here, I have, this is a fight sequence. So oh okay, you guys didn't hear sound, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is the sound of the bike, as I mentioned. So as I told you, these clips are sounds of the bike and its parts. And moving on the same track I have sound of the lighter. I'll just solo it. And so this is the way we save tracks. So this was a small session. So usually in some sessions what we do is we divide it. So we have A, B and C. So what we do is we sometimes use A for all the vehicles or car, bike, everything for A, or it depends on each sound designer. And we may use B for explosions or such type of sound. So that's how we do arrangement in film. And moving on to Foley, I'll just show you. So basically these sounds, you can look at this person, he's taking some snack from the container, so it's the sound of that. So all those sounds were bought into a single, I mean these number of tracks, so we don't use much. And moving on here, so as you can see, all these sounds are of the snacks, the guys having snack over there. And below here we have the footstep. So as you can see, each character, we don't this particular character, this guy is on the first track, and we have on the second track the second guy, the third track the third guy, and the fourth track the fourth guy. And if you move here on the same track, we have the footstep of this female character who's coming in. So within, I just have 4 footstep tracks, and this whole short film was completed with these number of tracks. So if I come over here, so if you guys can hear, you can see I had, so that was my first variation, followed by second variation, and that was my third variation. So 3 types of footstep on the same track. So that's how we do. So you guys may be thinking, like, if you want to do any kind of processing or such, I'll be there. What we do is we use rendering or processing, we process the tracks. So I'll talk to you in a short time. And then we have footstep over here. So as you can see, we completed the whole this whole short film in 108 tracks. So coming to background score, as you can see, the way rhythm, I'll just show you rhythm. So we don't specify what instrument it is. While working with rhythm tracks, we generally specify it with the frequency. So all the lower frequency content are brought into a single track, followed by the mid frequencies, and then we have the higher frequencies. So what we do is we separate the rhythm tracks according to their frequency. So if you can see, I'll just play this as a whole. So if you can look over here, we have this particular track. So that's how we separate each of them. And then this didn't have much background score, so as you can see, we have a single string track. We didn't create a layer of them. All of the layers were downmixed and we created a single track. So that's what you see here. And then okay, we have all the dialogues over here. All these are the dialogues. So for dialogues, we use specific tracks. So the reason for using specific track is, so if you look into ambience, we don't insert much plugins like EQ or compressor or such type of plugins into the inserts. We directly process them. So when I talk about processing, if I want to process this particular track, or say this, as you can see, if I want to do some kind of processing, say we'll add some EQ. So actually what I'm going to do is, it's called audio processing, and I have seen this in Pro Tools only till now. I don't know if I'm wrong. So what you do is you select this particular clip, as you can see here, and if you want, you can just monitor it. So I can see the frequencies. Say I want to make it like this. So now the sound has changed. So if I want, I can just take, I can insert it as a plugin, but inserting it as a plugin, what happens is we lose, it consumes a lot of CPU power. So having a lot of inserts in a single track, it's going to consume a lot of power for your CPU. So what we do is we render them. So I select this particular clip. Maybe I want it like this, or I want it like this. So whatever EQ I want, I select it and I press render. So what happens is, now I got this processing on this particular track, and I can just close this. So now, as you can see, there isn't any insert, and I got all my processing into this track. So if I play it, this was before, and this is after the processing. So this is a reason why we chose different tracks for dialogues and similar, I mean, these number of like say 10 tracks for complete ambience, and each track for each character while doing dialogues. So while doing dialogues, the reason why we choose separate tracks for each character is we add effects for them like EQ and all in each track, and it varies a lot. So that's the reason why we choose to why we use different tracks for dialogues. And so this is how the dialogue session looks, and we have the foley over here, followed by all the FX tracks. So this is my workflow. This is the way I work. I have all my ambience first, and followed by my FX, followed by my foley and footstep, and later only I get my dialogues and music. So that's down. So first I start laying down my ambience. So the reason for that is I get an idea of where it's happening. Okay, I got a question. The foley is manually adjusted, or it comes with a time base or something. Sorry, I have no idea on that. Yeah, okay. So the way we do foley is I'll just show you. I'll just play this, or else I'll do one thing. I'll take you. So these three clips, as you can see in the video, it's the sound of this guy hitting this particular utensil or the material. So now I'll solo it. So what we do is we have a reference. So in this session, actually this is a final cut, I mean the last session. Before that, before the session which we get, we have time code placed somewhere over here. So we look into the time code, and when maybe say at the sound which it's 1 hour 2 minutes 14, so we keep a note of that and we play somewhere from here, and we play it according similar to the way this guy performs over there. So it's manual. Most of the foley is usually manually done. Okay, I'll come to your question, Vishnu. So once we record it, we do it's out of sync most of the times, because it's hard to get into such a perfection. So what we do is we select this particular clip, and here I added a fade in. So I'll just. So one thing about Pro Tools to work easier is if you press your tab in your keyboard, it takes you to the loudest or your peak. Yeah, so if you press tab, it takes you to the peak. So I got it exactly the starting point. My cursor is exactly at the starting point, and if I hit A on my keyboard, everything before that is gone. And I select this clip, and you get options for nudging. So something that's called nudging, and I'll talk to it. So when you do nudge, you get frame by frame. So the audio starting is correctly exactly placed at the point where the sound starts. We trimmed the clip, and we look into the visual. So maybe at this particular point, or now the guy has taken his hand. So somewhere around here we place a clip, and what we do is we extend it back so that you don't lose any smaller, like maybe it may be an abrupt cut. So what we do is we pull out and we give a small fade in, so that you don't feel any abrupt cut. And That's the way you do each sound. So if I'm talking say sound effects, or so I'll show you this particular sequence. So this was something which was designed. So as you can see, in real life you can't hear such kind of sounds. So what you do is you design it. I have given whooshes over here. So that's one layer, and I have. So now the moment, as you can see, it hits him, it's somewhere over here. So you, similar to the way we did Foley just before, we select the clip, we nudge it and make sure it's in sync with the visual. So somewhere around this frame it's hitting him, so we place the audio over there and then we cross check. So we have the hit sounds, these two tracks, we have the whooshes here, and we have an overall low end. So that was a design sound. So it was a wind, and we did some processing on it, and we layered it with this complete. So overall it sounds like. Similarly, you have the slap over here. It's all layered. So a single sound is not used. We have layered a lot. Here also we have whooshes, and we have some reverb. So this is a reverb. So that was a reverb which we used, and we have. So that was a slap, and we have the whooshes. So all together you get it like. So that was the way we design. This is an example of sound designing, and so we had the sound editor placing all the sounds, and we designed it later. So that's an example, and that's how we place sound in sync with visual. So in Pro Tools, if you go deep, you can get frame by frame grid. So these dark blue lines, they are each frame. Okay, now I'll come into Vishnu's question. What is the difference between the blue and yellow line in the Foley track? Okay, let me just check it. Where was it? Are you talking about this particular light blue line and this dark line? Or were you talking about this? So we'll wait for his reply. For time-based processing, you use Sense or Audio Suite? I use processing. Around 72 or 73rd track. I think you're talking about this particular yellow line. Yeah, okay. So that's a feature in Pro Tools. It's called volume trim. So you can if you're talking about automation. That's something called automation. When you're talking about, you have different modes. So I'm not going into that. You can automate your volume. So talking about automation, it's like adjusting your volume. So I'll just show you an example. All these dots and these lines, all of them are automation. So here I have automation. All of them are automated. So I'll just show you this small clip, and I'll show you my mixer. So just look at these 3 tracks. So I'll play it. So as you can see, my faders were going around. So that's basically called automation. So you get your faders moving. So if you look at it, now it's this particular clip is in black. I mean, you can see a black line. So that's the automation for this particular clip. And if you select volume trim, it changes. So I'll just show you an example. At this particular moment, the fader is at -8 dB. Say I want this automation, say up to here. I want all of these automation to be there, but I want to increase it, the overall level I want to increase by say 3 dB. So instead of just pulling all of them, I have another option that's called volume trim. So I select that region, I select it and give say 3 dB. So now when you come here, the volume increased. Earlier it was at -8, now it's at -5.1. So what happens is, using volume trim you can increase. If you recorded an automation and you don't want to touch it, but you want to increase the overall level by a particular dB, you can use volume trim. So that's the yellow line, and I'll talk to you about this blue line also. So my Foley and all of them, so just have a look at the way the line moves. It's something like this. This Foley is assigned to a particular group, and going up I have my VCA. So whatever I do for my VCA, it gets affected down. It's affected over here. So as you can see, this particular point there's a sudden jump, and if you go up at the same point, you have created a jump over here. So the benefit of, I'll talk to you about it. I have prepared the session in such a way. So when you create the VCA, you can control the whole Foley tracks. Say you have these much number of tracks, everything is controlled. So it's like you have automation over here. The VCA automation works above this. So if you reduce the VCA completely to -infinity or 0, if you're talking exactly, it's -infinity, where you hear nothing, this automation is also affected by that. So if you decrease say -3 dB, here also it's decreased by -3 dB. So VCAs and all I used during final mix, and this is a final mix session. So that's the reason you can see VCA. So that was to create, I wanted all of them to create a perfect balance. We use VCS in the during the final mix session. And I had one more question. For time based you use sensor auxiliaries or audio Z. Okay, I use I process them, I mean audio Z. So I don't use much of the sense. For ambience and all, it's a mixed. So I mix it, like I have sense and I have processed audio. So if you want to see an example, okay, I'll show you the dialogue session. Okay, so this particular voice is the voice of the character inside this particular character. It's her voice. So what happens is, I'll first play you this clip. So as you can hear, it's clear and we have some EQ on it. So moving on, I'll play this particular track. So that's reverb. So this same clip was brought down, and I did some kind of processing on it, and the result is this particular audio clip. So as you can see, it has a name different from this. So both of them mixed together, I have mixed them, so I hear it like. Okay, so the difference between send and insert. Okay, talking about insert, I'll show you. Okay, maybe inserts we use more on the music session. We don't use inserts much on this sound sessions. So I'll do one thing, let me check, or else. Okay, I'll show you insert with this. So what happens with insert is, say you have, I'll insert an EQ, and I'll solo this track. Okay, I'll manage the volume, and I'll take care of it. So that was the dialogue, and I have inserted this particular EQ into this track. So so the tonality has changed. So when you insert it, say with this EQ setting, it's going to affect whatever clip is there on this track. These number of clips, everything is going to be affected by insert. So insert you usually use when you're confident that the same processing should be used completely or throughout the track, and we don't use it on film sessions. We use it while doing music mix, because maybe the vocalist may need a particular kind of EQ or some DSO or compression. The compression should be present throughout the track, so we use inserts in such cases. And talking about send, send is a bit complicated to explain, because you use sends in different scenarios. In general, I cannot say in general also. One situation where we use sends is for time-based processing or something called reverb and delay. So we don't usually insert reverb plugins on our track itself. We use sends. So the benefit of using sends is you can, as we saw earlier during the dialogue over here, we have a combination of both of them. So instead of using send, I have used processing. So I can control the amount of reverb and the amount of original clip. So as you can see here, I'll show you. So this is a combination of both. I have both of them over here. So if that's a case where I want the raw, I'm sorry, if you want the raw audio to be heard more, you can create a balance between the raw audio and the reverb track. So in sends also it's the same case. You can send your audio, so you have sends over here, you send it, you send your audio to a particular, I'll show you routing, I'll show you routing also. So coming back, we have types of tracks. So as you can see here, we have these number of tracks, and this is called reverb. We have initially 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have ambient submaster, the FX submaster, Foley submaster, dialogue, or also known as DX submaster, and music, which is also called as MX submaster. So what happens is, if you have 10 audio tracks of ambience, all of these 10 audio tracks is routed into ambience submaster. So if you have 10 tracks of FX, all of them are routed into FX submaster. So all the ambience track comes into this ambience submaster, and from here it goes into the pre-master, and we have all the effects coming into the FX submaster, and we have all foley coming into this, we have the dialogues coming into this, and music into this submaster. So the reason we use submaster is you can create or you can add some kind of processing as a whole. So while doing dialogues, we add compression so that we don't peak or the dialogue isn't so loud. So we add compression into the dialogue submaster so that it's affected to the whole, all the tracks or all the clips in the dialogues. And moving down, we have aux for various effects. So I have, most of them are reverb. So in my session I have created different types of reverbs. So each of them are having different characteristic. So I use them depending on whatever is needed. So maybe I may need the reverb which is heard inside a church. So I'll have usually we assign each of them. And if you want the vocal to be heard in such a like in a church environment, you use send and send the audio into this particular auxiliary tracks. So you can insert various reverb here. So I have used a reverb called Altiverb on these tracks, and I have used the S360 from Waves, and simultaneously I have the R360 over here, and again I have the Altiverb and the R360, and I have the Fab Filter reverb. So these are the reverbs which I mainly use. And I have VCA faders. So as I mentioned before, all my ambience track is grouped and it's assigned to a VCA fader. So my naming is, I have V before all my VCA tracks so that it's easy for me to identify those tracks. And moving on, this is the routing which I talked to you just before. So I haven't shown you all the tracks, but some number of tracks, as you can see. All my ambience is going into this submaster. All my effects is going into the second submaster. All my foley and my footstep together is going to the foley submaster. In this session, so this is my template, and I don't have any audio going into my dialogue or music in this session because that's something which we reserve after we start the project. So when I begin a project, I have this template loaded, and that's how it's all routed. So I just have to start working. So when I receive my dialogue tracks, I just have to route all of those audio dialogue tracks into this DX submaster, and all my music track into the MX submaster. So moving on, basic surround sound tools. So all of you, I think, might have seen the traditional stereo panel. So stereo panel, I'll just show you an example. I'll create a mono track. So this is the traditional stereo panel in Pro Tools, and this is a stereo panel. This is a mono panel to be precise, and this is a stereo panel. In stereo panel you have two knobs, and in mono you have a single knob. So the difference between, there are some more features in surround sound panel. So this is a stereo surround panel, and this is a mono surround panel. So as you can see, there are two small dots over here and a single dot over here. So this particular, it's similar to a stereo panel also, so I'll just show you with a mono track. You have, this is a two-dimensional space. So this dot determines the position where your sound or your audio is heard from. So I'll show you in Pro Tools. So this particular track, the sound is positioned over here, and I have, this is my dialogue track, so I can position each of the sound in anywhere in this two-dimensional space. So I can position it here. So this is a 5.1 session. As you can see, 1 2 3 4 5 speakers. So this is the left, center, right, left surround, right surround. So you position it anywhere. So now it's in the left surround, right, center and left. Even you can do automation for these tracks. So to show automation, have a look at this. I'll solo it for you. Now the position is at center, and I'll so the position was changed to somewhere here. So that's how we do pan automation, and I'll show you how to do it. Now have a look at the position of this point. So our time is running, our time code, and then we pan it somewhere like this. So you select the point, you position it wherever you want, and that's done. So it's recorded, the automation is recorded, and now the sound travels in that position. Okay, folder track. I'm using Pro Tools 12.5 and I didn't receive my it's in 2020.3 version. And yes, folder tracks is definitely, it's going to help for these kind of works, because it won't be so something like this. Like if a new person or someone else comes and look into the session, he may won't understand what all is there in these tracks. So when you create folder tracks, it would be more easier. So definitely, yeah, folder tracks is going to be a benefit. So moving on. So I'll talk to you about panel. So as I told you, this is the two-dimensional space where you can position each sound. And these knobs, without touching the point over here, you can adjust the position using the knobs over here. So I'll show you that also. So my front, it shows the position. So I have this, so if say I want it to be in this path, I can create something like this. And then talking about center, while working in stereo format, I hope you guys know you use two speakers. You have the left and the right speaker. You don't have something called the center channel. So how do you create center? What happens is, when you position a sound in center, basically what happens is the left and the right speaker together produces equal amplitude, and when equal amplitude comes together, you feel it to be in the center. So that's how you create center, and that's something called phantom center, which means there isn't a center speaker does not exist, but still you perceive the sound from the center. But while working in surround sound formats, you get an additional speaker, which is a center speaker. So if you position an audio over here, it's going to play mainly from the center speaker. So there are situations where you don't want the center speaker. When you're talking about ambience, you may want the ambience in your surrounds or in your left right position only, and you keep the center for dialogues. And in such situation, we often use a center percentage. So what happens if it's in center 100%, you all equal amount of audio is sent into the center speaker. But as I told before, you may not want the audio to go into the center speaker. So just put it into 0, you lose the center speaker, and now you hear it only from your remaining 4 channels. So you can determine the amount of audio feeding into the center speaker. So it's all dependent on the work. So this is I'm just giving you a brief introduction above. And divergence is something I'll show you. Okay, say this particular audio clip, I want the more to be heard from the front. So what I do is I form something like this. So I don't hear much from the rear side. I hear more sound from the front. So I created a divergence. And if it's like this, equal amount of audio is feeding into all of these channels. Similar to front, I can do it like this so that more sound is heard from the rear side. And you can create like this also from the front right knob. Okay, decide the placement of what? Can you be specific? So that's what you can do with divergence. And then I hope I cleared this section. And there's something called LFE, the low frequency effect. So many of you might have been to theaters, and when you hear loud explosions, you feel like the theater is you hear rumbleness. So all these rumble, the feel which you get is determined by this LFE knob. It's basically a send, and whenever you choose a channel into a 5.1 path, you automatically the LFE channel is automatically formed and it's routed. So you just have to determine how much level of LFE or low frequency effect is needed for that particular track. So that is where you use the LFE, and most of the time you use it for sounds having more low frequency, so that you have the subs going into the subwoofer. It determines the amount of low frequency going into the subwoofer. And then you have the fader, you have the automation mode, the solo and mute. So this is a basic introduction to a surround panel. And then moving on, I'll show you basic editing tools, editing a clip, and session management. So we'll move on to Pro Tools. So in between the session, I hope I cleared some point of editing. So now I'll show you in detail, like where you'll place the sounds in the surround plane. Okay, that determines a lot on the film which you're working on. So I'll talk about music now. So if you're working surround sound with music, try to keep your rhythmic instruments in the front and don't put it into your surround. So as you can see here, this is the front or the stage. It's called the stage, and you have all your rhythm in your stage position, and you don't pull it back to this position or somewhere over here. Always try to keep it on this plane or this line, and don't pull it back into the surrounds. So you can keep it over here or somewhere over here. It determines on each mix engineer. So in this particular work, I have kept it over here, and I don't put it into my surrounds. And in my surrounds, I have my pad. So this is a pad which is somewhere positioned over here, so as you can see. And then my effects, I'll show you this track. So I'll play you from this region. So I'll play the sound of the second bike. So as you can see, so just look at the position, how I panned it. So that's how you it all depends on the film. How does surround mix, like say 5.1 is translated into stereo mix? Actually, you cannot translate exactly like what you hear in 5.1. There are down mixers, but it depends on the settings which you use on it. A 5.1 mix for theaters, I would recommend mixing it in a 5.1 mix studio, and don't try to mix it in a stereo headphone. Something for YouTube content, okay, that's fine, you can use headphones. So you can use down mixers for such cases. And then, okay, I'll talk to you. So one thing which I'd like to show you in this session is, I'll play you this region. Actually, this particular clip, this was designed. So when I talk about designed, I try to create this sounding from the sound of this. Actually, I processed this track, and from this audio clip, I had this audio clip over here, I positioned it here. I did some kind of processing so that it matches with this bike. Actually, I got a small clip of the bike only, the sound of the bike. So I had to complete the sequence. So what I did was, I chose another bike, and it was this sound, to be precise. I think I'll increase the volume for you. So did you guys hear it? I had a whole clip and I just trimmed it off. So this was the basic tonality of the bike, and I processed and I made it sound like this. So this clip and this clip, the sound source was same, but then we did different kinds of processing and made it sound similar to this bike. So that's basically designing. So I took this clip, placed it here, and I did various kinds of processing, and that was part of designing, and I designed it, and then I got this sound. So now I'll talk to you about placement, I mean positioning sound in a edit session. So how to position each sound in sync with the visual. So I'll talk to you about footstep, because that is something which I feel is very hard to do, because it should be very much precise. So I'll start with this particular character, as you can see here. So after that, we faded out, or we just deleted all the remaining clips. So as you can see, the first clip, his right leg touches the ground. So to be more precise, what I did was something called nudging. So nudging, as you can see here, my nudge value is set to half frame. So you can nudge using your plus or minus in your number pad and not in your normal smaller keyboard. The keyboard where you have the number pad, you can use a plus or minus to nudge between each frame. So if I press my plus, I can move forward, and this is the exact time where his feet touches the ground. So at that particular position, I placed my audio. So that was his first step. So now the second one. So I bring it here. So now it's in air. Okay, so he just touched it, and I have my audio over there. So while working on sound design projects, you should be very much precise while placing your sounds, or else it can be out of sync. So I'll show you an example. if this clip wasn't, I say it was here. So now I want to position it with with his left feet. So I'll take this. So I look at an average time. So it's somewhere over here. I place it sound there. I select the clip and I start nudging. So yeah, now his feet touched the ground. So now it's there in position. So similar to this, I created footstep for each of them. So we look into the time when they touch the ground. So it's somewhat here, and at that point I place an audio clip, and then the next one. So for faster workflow, what I do is, as I told or mentioned before, I use tabbed key so that I can go straight into the loudest part or the moment the sound wave begins. So I'll show you. Okay, so in this case, I want immediately, or for a faster workflow, what I do is we hit tab and I go into my first point, and again if I hit tab, so as you can see, it took me to this position. So I hit A, position the sound, and then I just bring it out so that I missed some portion. So I get it back. So I just extend it, and maybe if you want, you can give a small fade in so that you don't feel an abrupt jump into the audio clip. So working with dialogues, I'll show you. Yeah, this female character. So this is Malayalam. I'm sorry if you guys don't understand. So we look at the time. So as you can see, somewhere at this point she started to speak. So we nudge and decide the exact position. So till then her mouth was closed and she's ready to speak, and somewhere over here, if you just look at the lip movement, she has started to speak the first word, and that's somewhere over here, and that's how we place the dialogues in sync with the visual. And if you look at this sequence, the male character, so that's this particular clip. So he's ready to speak, and at this moment we place this clip so that it's in sync. So nudging is something which is very much important while you do sound designing. It helps and it saves your time a lot. So if you're working with anything, say dialogues, music, effects, foley, you can use the nudge option so that you can make sure that the sound is in sync with the visual, and it starts at the same time when the visual incident is happening. If a person is speaking, just look at the mouth movements. So there are cases where the character, to be more precise, like before speaking something, our lips it's preparing itself. So you can see the slight lip movements. So just after that, again there's a lip movement, and at that particular moment, you can make sure that the dialogue is starting. So if I take you to this sequence, so here also what we did is nudging. We look into the time and we select the clip and make sure it's in sync with his lip. So that's the main job of a dialogue editor and sound effects editor. He do all these kind of sounds, and he also lays down the ambience and all these. So we have ambience over here. So we layer ambiences.
ഇച്ചു
ഇച്ചു
പിന്നെ പേര് വിളിക്കണം.
ആ അതാണ്.
So we have layers of sound, and it's not a single sound which creates the ambience for this scene. So if you move on to take any scene, you have layers, and here also you have layers. I'll play you the sequence. So these sounds were recorded live. We went to this particular place called Kalai and we recorded it. So these much number of tracks together creates the ambience for this scene. And while recording we had so this is one layer, this is a second layer, we have some wind on the third and fourth layer, then we have so all of them together creates the ambience for a scene. So is there any question till now? Is there anything you would like to ask me? So we can have 5-minute session for clearing your doubts, and then we'll be moving on to preparing a session for mix. So till then you can ask any questions or anything. So I hope it's clear for you. So now we'll move on to something called preparing a session for mix. So 3 points which is very much important. Keep it simple. So don't try to make your session big. If it demands to be big, definitely you should keep it like that, but if there are scope to bring your session down or reduce the number of tracks, always try to do that. So keep it simple and don't make it so complicated. Okay, for reverb, 8 tracks, aux track. Okay, for reverb I use something called Altiverb from Audio Ease. So I'll show you. So this is a plugin which I use for in most of my processing. So I have it on my inserts too. So this is my next. And then we have okay, the purpose. Okay, so one benefit of Altiverb is it's something called IR reverb. So you get to create it's not something which you use on music. It's not musical reverb. You create space using it. Altiverb helps in creating space for your audio. So I'll show you an example. So yeah, so I'll show you this. So you hear it as if it's in a room or something happening inside the room. And another case where I've used where I have processed multiverb, I'll show you. Yeah, so I had that sound, and this is my processed track. So basically it creates a space for your audio so that you feel that audio is happening inside that particular space. You can using multiverb, you can determine the place where it's happening. You have different kinds of presets. You have a lot of presets as you so you can use all of them for the post-production work. So if you're in the outdoor, you have different types of presets, so you can choose any one of them, and you can render or insert them on your aux tracks. So that's the purpose why I use a reverb on my aux tracks. I hope it's clear. And now one thing to keep in your mind while preparing a session for mix, real-time it depends on each work. So in this particular session, I have a mix of both. I have used sends, and I have also processed the audio clip using reverb. So it depends on each engineer. So you can use both. That's not wrong something. So moving on, avoid inserting third-party plugins. So third-party plugin, what I'm referring is something other than Avid plugins, something which you get while purchasing Avid. So if one of the reason why you have to avoid using third-party plugins is, say if I'm sending to someone, and or if I'm sending it for final mix, maybe they won't be having the multiverb or any plugin, maybe any third-party plugin they may not have. So what happens is I might have created. Okay, so I'll share one more thing. The reason why we use processing rather than sends is, this is one of the most important reason, because say if I have sends in this track and instead of processing it I use sends, then what happens is I have created a balance for between the reverb and the original sound. So for me, while I'm in my maybe in my studio doing my sound editing, for me it may feel like, okay, now this is the exact, or this is the right amount of reverb needed, or this is the exact reverb which I want for that particular room. But what happens is maybe this plugin is not present in the mix stage, or they may not have it. So what happens is you miss the space, and that's something which is not advisable. So in this session, this is a session which is a final mix session, so you have all the inserts and plugins and all. But if you're sending a session for final mix, let it be music or anything, background score or something, try to avoid using third-party plugins in your insert. Always use you can use Avid Pro Tools standard default plugins, something which you get while purchasing it. Other than that, it's advised, it's good to avoid, or else you can contact the mix stage and ask them if they have this particular kind of plugin. If they say yes, definitely you can insert that and you can send it to them. If they say no, one thing which you can do is you can process the audio as I showed before. You can use the audio suite and process the audio. And the third point which you have to keep in mind is clear unwanted audio clips. So I'll show you an example for that. I don't know if there's any unwanted clip in this, because Okay, there isn't any unwanted audio clip. So I'll do one thing. I'll show you a new session. So I'll just show you my template also with this. Okay, so our session is getting ready. Yeah, so this is my template which I use for sound editing purpose. So now as you can see, you don't have any clips over here. So I'll create a clip. So I got one clip over here, and I have my second clip, my third clip, and say I trim this. I trim it like this. Then I add another clip. So say I have 4 audio clips in my session. So when you start working, what happens is I'll create another long clip. Maybe this might be an audio clip, and I want only audio until here. So as you can see here, a new audio clip is formed. 4.1. So this audio clip, I select here, I break it. Now I formed another 2 set of clips, and I do it again, another set of clips are formed. So now what happens is I want only this clip, and I don't want these 2 clips. So I select them, I hit delete. So I got what I wanted. But now as you can see, the remaining 2 clips which I deleted are still present in my clip list, and I don't want it to be received by the mix engineer, as we are not using it. So what I do is I go here, I select unused. So as you can see, these 3 clips are unused, and I'm not using them in my session right now. So if I'm done with my sound, I say this is all these 5 clips are needed or is to be sent to the mix engineer. I keep them here. I select the unused, as I showed you before, unused. Then I hit clear. So you get a message like this. I say remove, and now all of them are gone. So now what happens is, if you, as we did before, if you had those 3 audio clips, it's actually consuming your space. So maybe if it's a long file, you'll have like some 50-100 MB of audio, and it's going to be added onto your final project folder, and while sending you may get something like 5 to 10 GB of session. So it's maybe the mix engineer or mix studio will not prefer that. So what you have to do is try to clear all the unwanted clips or something which is not used in your session. And then, so if you say you have it like this, now the next thing which you have to do is, if you're done with your sound designing everything and you're ready for mix, one thing you have to do is select these audio clips, and as you can see, now say all of them are in sync with my video, and I don't want these audio clips to be moved. So for example, if I hit select, now it's moving, or say like this, it's moving. So I don't want that to happen. So what I do is I go there, I select clip, I have edit lock. So once I hit this, I receive a message like this. This command will affect 1 or more locked clips. So if you want that clip to be moved, you can hit allow or just hit cancel. So by mistake, there are chances that you just drag it or move the audio clip, you receive this message. So if it's by mistake, you get to know that you moved something. And if willingly or with your if you really want to move it, you can just hit allow, so that it goes there. So that's the purpose of lock. So that's something called locking your session. So you lock all your audio clips so that it won't move. So as you see, again I get that message. So I hit allow, it the time has changed. And there's one more thing, time lock unlock. So if I pull it down, it won't change. So I again receive the same message. So if I hit allow, it moves, or else it stays there. So make sure that you lock your your sound editing session, so that your audio clips are not moved by mistake by the sound mix engineer, so that everything is in position or in sync with the visual. And these are the main things which you should keep in your mind while preparing a session for mix. And try to avoid using or adding automation in your clip or your session if you're preparing it for mix, because the mix engine is definitely going to mix it again. So try to avoid using automation in your sessions. And that's something called preparing for a session for mix. And now, talking about background score, I'll just show you one example. Sorry for the delay. Session is loading. So as you can see, the background score, we don't have much tracks over here. Only this much number of tracks is used to score the whole film. So try to reduce your number of tracks when you're working. Now generally a particular reel may receive up to 30 to 40 audio tracks, and that whole reel will be covered using that 40 tracks of audio. So I'll just talk to you about some categories, how to categorize sound. So if you're working with guitars, you can choose between acoustic guitar. So if you have recorded something, you can name it as acoustic guitar live. And if you played something using a VST, you can name it as acoustic guitar FX. And you can okay, so then we can have electric guitars on a separate track. Or in general, if you want to save more space, you can place all your guitars into a single track, or maybe two different tracks, two stereo tracks, and all your guitars will be there in that. And talking about vocals, you can separate it by male and female, maybe 2 tracks for male and 2 tracks for female. And then strings, you can have low strings, low strings, I mean bass, cello, and you can have your viola on another track, and you can have your violins on your another track. So you get 3 different tracks: low string, mid string, and high string. And working with rhythm, you can again separate it using your frequency. So you have the low rhythm, you have your mid, you have your highs. So that's how you work with rhythm. And then you can have your bass guitar on a separate track, and all other clips or audio which is played using keyboard, say your piano or your bells or something, any tone which something similar to that. All of them can be placed in a single track called keys. So you can have 2 to 3 keys track, and you can have all of them in all of your clips in those 3 tracks. And then you can have a separate track for pad, and you can have effects. So what I mean by effects is like, again, you can use whooshes in your score. So all of them can be categorized into FX tracks. Is there any other reason for separating the tracks based on frequency? Yeah, definitely yes. There's a purpose for separating the tracks based on your frequency. So if you're talking about low rhythm or any low frequency sounds, generally they are placed in the center. So what happens is, if you give the mix engineer a single rhythm track with low, mid and high frequency all together, what happens is you cannot position the lower frequency elements in the center, and the remaining frequencies can be spreaded out a bit. So to get separation in space, you have to, it's advisable to separate your rhythm tracks based on the frequency. So that's the reason why we do that, so that it's easy for the mix engineer to position each sound in a 2-dimensional space. So that's something about sound editing and preparing a session for mix. So now you can ask your questions, or if you have any doubts, we can clear it. You can ask your questions if you have any. So I hope it's clear for you guys. So there isn't any questions till now. What the shortcut for enable or disable automation lines in the session? Okay, shortcut to enable or disable automation lines. You can use the minus sign in your keyboard. So when you hit minus, you get the automation lines. I didn't get the part where you said about don't start the effect at exact place where it's taking place. I didn't get you. Like, I don't remember where I said that. How do you categorize the ambience, like room tone and stuff? The way I work with ambience is, I'll show you better my template. So as you can see here, the way I have laid down my ambience trackers, I have ambience A till 1 to 5, and then I have something called ambience sweeteners from 1 to 5, and that's part of A. Then I have ambience B 1 to 5, and again I have sweeteners from, I have 3 sweeteners in this track, and then I have another 5 tracks of ambience in C category. So the way I do is, maybe say you have the first scene of your visual, maybe it's happening inside a room. So that scene changes and goes into the roadside at this particular moment. So I create a marker over there, and I layer my first audio track like this. So as you can see, I have, this is my start, and this is my time where the scene changes. So for my next scene, say there may be a layer of sounds like this, and I'll go deep into it. So as you can see, this is my starting point. So I have I create a fade in, and I just don't start exactly at this point or where it starts. Okay, now I think this is what Saitesh asked me. What I meant was, if I laying down ambience and all, like in this case, when you play back, you if you start the audio at exactly the same time, what happens is you feel a sudden jump or a small noise is heard. So it's better you use crossfade, fade in, and I fade in use like this. So again in this clip, so that you don't feel a sudden change, and here also I do the same towards my end. So similar to that I do here. So I create fade in for the clips. So now my scene 1 is done. So what about my scene 2? Since my scene 2 is starting over here, what I do is I use my ambience B, my next set of ambience, and I start them somewhere from here. So my next set of ambience goes say up to here. So now again I give fade in on this particular point. So now we create a kind of crossfade over at this time. We have crossfade. So now I have control over my ambience B, that is my next scene, and my first scene. So again, if I move on to my third scene, I layer it over here, and next my fourth scene will come somewhere over here. And then again my next clip will come over here. So this is the way I layer my ambience. So I hope that's clear. Okay, sweeteners. So talking about sweeteners, consider you're sitting in you're working for a scene like inside a room, and you want some birds to just enhance the mood of the film. So at intervals, at certain intervals, you want some sound of the birds. And so what do? You have a complete layer of room tone, maybe some distant traffic, and whatever layer you have laid it down. Say I want a bird to be heard at this time, at this time, and this time. So what really happens is it's basically enhancing the scene. So you don't place these sounds into your effects. Instead, you place it with sweeteners, so that it's like it's basically enhancing or making the scene more realistic. And if you want to add small such elements, those things can be laid down into your sweeteners. And now you can ask your questions. Is there anything which you would like to know? to balance my mix, I use the VCA faders. I don't use my sub mix. Is there any questions? Any more questions? So that if there isn't any question, we can wrap up the session. Okay, so I'm wrapping up the session, and tomorrow we'll be having more sessions. We'll be sending you mails on more information. Okay, and how do you send these files as session or bounce files into it? Okay, so sending a session, I'll show you. So if you want to send this particular session, I'm talking about Pro Tools. So as I told you, I just hit Control Shift U. So shortcut to select the unused clip is Control Shift U. So if you hit Control Shift U, the unused clips will be shown here. So I'll delete few more clips. So you can have all these unused clips. And another shortcut is, so once you hit once you select the unused clip, just hit Control Shift B and you get this message, and you just hit remove, and that's gone. So now all of your clip is being used, and once this is ready, as I mentioned before, we lock the mix. So you select everything. So, and shortcut is Control L, and your mix is locked. And once that's done, you hit File, Save Copy In, and when you hit Save Copy In, you get this window. So here you can select your sample rate, you have a bit depth, and items to copy. You hit your audio files, and if there is any video clip, you can select that. And all your fade and root plugin sessions and all, you can, it depends on each work. So we can hit that, and you hit OK. You get another pop-up window asking where to save this, and once you save that, I hit cancelled. The session gets saved, and I'll show you another session which was save copied. Yeah, so you get it something like this. You have your audio files, you have your fade presets, you have your plugin settings, you have your video files, and at last you have your Pro Tools session. So one thing to keep in your mind, if you are planning to send your Pro Tools session, simply sending this particular file will not work. You have to create a save copy, and that folder should be sent. And once this is ready, we hit share. We zip the folder and we send it. So that's how we send the session. And situations are there where the other person isn't using Pro Tools. So in such cases, what we do is we definitely bounce the files. So what we do is we select everything, we consolidate the clip. So you go here, and the shortcut is Alt Shift 3. You hit consolidate clip, you get this message, you hit allow. So you can see this happening. So the reason to consolidate your clip is Pro Tools, if you try to bounce this as audio clips, what happens is each clip is a new audio file is formed for each clip. So this audio clip and this audio clip and this audio clip, all of them will be having 3 different files. So, and the duration of the files will be only this much, as you can see. So I may want the mix engineer to just drag and drop the audio files, and every track should be in sync with the visual. So what we do is we consolidate the clip from the start to the end position, and that's how what okay, we consolidate the clip and make it one. So I think we'll just cancel this and delete these 3 clips, and say we'll talk about we have 3 clips over here. So this is my starting point, so I select them, I keep it to my starting point, keep it like this. I hit Alt Shift 3. So again I receive this message, I hit allow. Okay, other than Pro Tools, what other DAWs do people use for post-production? So Nuendo is something which is used for post-production, and definitely you can use other DAWs too, but something which is used most widely is Pro Tools and Nuendo from Steinberg. Actually the premix happens so the mix engineer and the premix engineer, they both are at the same place. So before the premix engineer works on the session, I mean before the final mix engineer works on the session, the premix engineer tries to balance each and every single tracks. So if it's ambience, all of the 10 ambience tracks, say if you have 10 audio clips playing simultaneously, the premix engineer, what he does, he tries to create a balance between all the ambience, the 10 ambience tracks, the 10 ambience clips, and he won't try to create a balance between ambience, sound effects, foley. He just tries to create an ambience within, he just tries to create a mix or balance between the ambience tracks alone, and then he moves on to the sound effects track. So he solos all those tracks. He tries to create a mix between all the individual solo sound effects track, followed by foley. So it depends on the way each track comes in. So maybe some prefer to have the effects and foley in the top, followed by the ambience and all. So as you can see now, we have got all our audio clips. So if it's now if you want to send it for the mix, I'll clear all of them. So this is how these all are your tracks. Next thing what I have to do is it's at 1. So there's a shortcut Control Shift K, and when you hit Control Shift K, you get an option like this. So you select prompting for each duplicate, you select the destination, all of your settings, and you hit export. All of these tracks will be exported as single audio clips. So one thing to keep in mind, if it's something like this, as you can see, this is one audio clip and this is the second one. What happens is when you export it, this one will have this much of duration, and this clip is going to be formed as a new track. It's not the way you work in Nuendo, Cubase and all, Studio One. In all other DAWs, what happens is, if you just, it basically consolidates the track by itself, and we don't have to do it. So if you have one more piece of audio, if it's something like this and you hit export in any other DAW, you get a single track with all of them together. But in Pro Tools, if you hit export, you get 3 different audio tracks. And what happens is, if you try to import all of the 3 different tracks, it's going to be placed something like this. It's going to be like this. So again, you'll have to position each sound. So if you have, say, 100 audio, small minute audio clips, it's going to be formed as 100 audio tracks, and again you'll have to position each sound. So make sure you consolidate your track before sending it for final mix. Any other questions? So I think it's time for us to wrap up this session. So I hope you all understood the concept of sound editing and how sound works in film. So we have more sessions coming up, and we have a session on mixing, sound mixing, we have music mixing, and we do have live sound sessions. So thank you for joining in for this session on sound editing. So I think we can wrap up the session and end the streaming.